You are listening to the Wildlife Photography Podcast with Rob Reed and Josh Galicki, bringing together the love of nature and photography. Episode 27. We talk about photography competitions from the perspective of an organizer and a judge. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the Wildlife Photography Podcast with me, Rob Reed, and my co-host Josh Galicki. Hey Josh, how's it going? We haven't spoken for a while.
I was going to say it has been a while. It feels like forever. It's going well. Lots happened since we last spoke.
Yeah, we tend to record these things in like bunches, don't we? 2 or 3 at a go, and then we don't speak for a while, and then it's
Yeah.
A bit like London buses. They all come along 2 at once, and then you don't see one for about however long. but anyway, so what's new in the world of Josh since we last spoke?
You know, I've been shooting as much as I could. Work's been busy, and I've got this shoreline project going on for the past couple of weeks. And I if you've ever seen like these old wooden bulkheads, I have one on my property, and it was put in like the 1960s, and it's like completely deteriorated. So I'm using all the rock. There's some rock around the shoreline, and I'm building up a brand new riprap. And I'm raising it up to, I mean, where I'm at, they're saying sea level rise in the next 25 years could be like 1.5 feet. So trying to get ahead of the curve a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's been a big project. I know, right? It's just slowing the tide really, right? But it's been a big project. And yeah, that's right. And yeah, I think it'll be wrapped up probably in a week or so. And it's gotten in the way of my shooting a little bit, but it's something I've been wanting to get done for a while. So that's been taking a lot of my time. But
you must have the migrants coming back in again now.
Yeah, interesting enough, past couple of weeks, I've had some ducks in eclipse plumage, which is when ducks molt all of their feathers. They're flightless. They kind of look brown and raggedy, but I had a good time with that. I was getting some cool silhouettes and some things where they're kind of hiding out in the grasses and whatnot. So had some ducks come in, some shorebirds are moving through, some passerines are moving through. Things have started to pick up, but I think in the next couple of weeks we'll start to see, some of the major changes as things cool off and we get some northern winds and things move down. But yeah, no, it's been good shooting here and there. I'm getting ready to trying to get my trip together to San Francisco for the California Academy of Sciences for the big picture. Which is another photo. Speaking of photo contests, it was a photo contest. I had a picture placed there, and they're going to have an awards presentation, kind of gala night, and I think they're going to do some sort of panel talking about photography. So I'll participate in that. So I'm trying to get my trip together, and then it's September. It's coming up soon, September I think 27th. So got to get my flight, get that arranged. But
well, because I mean we're recording this beginning of September, so yeah, you haven't got long.
No,
you haven't got long. Well, I've been busy doing. Well, I've been changing gear actually. So I got. Well, we were talking before we started recording, but I sold the D850. I bit the bullet and thought, well, do you know what? Having used mirrorless, am I ever going to use the D850 again? And I did use it a couple of months ago, and just. This thought just went through my head. I just like, no, once you've gone mirrorless, there's no going back, is there?
Agreed. Yeah.
So I just thought, what's the point? And there's going to come a time very soon when actually the D850 isn't going to be worth that much because the whole mirrorless thing is going to have taken over the world to the point where nobody wants to shoot DSLR anymore. So I thought now's the time. Ways need to part, so I sold my D850. I sold my 200 to 500. God, I love that lens. That was my my go-to lens. I took so many pictures with that, and the D850 and the D800 before it, and so I got rid of that. And what else? Oh, and I did decide to get rid of my 70 to 200 as well. I don't know. It's going through my pictures. I realized I didn't use it very often, and of course it's F mount. And if I'm going to go the whole Z mount route and stick with the Z9 and probably buy another backup body, well, it won't be a Z9, that's for sure, but it'll be I don't know, Z7 II or something like that secondhand. What's the point in having F mount glass anymore? particularly something I don't use. So I sold all those and I replaced them with the 180 to 600. And then I bought the 24 to 120 as well, which gives me, really good range and just two lenses.
Just two lenses. Yeah.
Yeah. And I still got my macro and I still got the wide angle on the F mount. And eventually I'll come to replace those as well, obviously with the Z mount. But yeah, so I'm loving the 180 to 600. Man. Well, we'll come on to that and we'll talk about that in a future podcast. But yeah.
I'm glad you're happy with your Nikon gear. I can't be more disappointed in Canon over the past month. This R1 announcement, 24 megapixels, 40 frames a second. The A9 III, I think, does 120 frames a second at 24 megapixel. Canon, what are you doing? So anyhow, I'm fairly frustrated.
Isn't it funny how the manufacturers, they swing around, don't they? Can you remember, you take yourself back 3 or 4 years and it's like everybody's going, what the F is going on with Nikon, right?
Yeah, Nikon was really behind in 2020,
yeah, it's
say around that time. Yeah.
Honestly, I was at the point of going, do I swap allegiances because they are so far behind the curve now? And now look, the pendulum has swung round again, and you've got to say that, the Z9 is up there with the best. And the lenses they're coming out with as well.
And you've got decent resolution on that. What is that? 45 megapixels?
45.
Yeah. I mean, 24 and the R1 is inexcusable, if you ask me. Problem with Canon is all the people who hold sway, it's all the sports folks. It's all these folks, they're in the end zone or they're shooting the Olympics or at a football game, and they want these, low megapixel, type images with good noise that they can shoot to get published within an hour or two of taking the image, I guess, and they dominate the conversation. Wildlife's on the background, unfortunately. That's my opinion. That's why it's the only thing.
I think you're right. I think you're right, because the thing is, when you look at the functionality of cameras and lenses between sports and wildlife, it's pretty similar.
Yeah.
But the end product is used in a different way.
Yeah.
With sports, it's it's newspapers, it's online, so the resolution isn't really that important. Whereas wildlife, you've got that, but there's so much more to that. There's fine art prints. There's all this sort of stuff going on as well. So
a larger resolution demand. Yeah.
And
friend of mine was.
And there's a cropping factor, of course, as well.
That's right. Yeah. A good friend of mine years ago, he was a photographer. He did work for the New York Times, and he told me it was 11 megapixel. That's all he needed, right? To get something in a newspaper, which was primarily black and white, and, it didn't really matter. So we need a little more than that at this point, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, take yourself back 15 years or what? Is it 50? Oh, yeah. It must have been. Take yourself back 15, maybe 20 now. Crikey, doesn't time fly? And 12 megapixels. Oh my God, you've got 12 megapixels. It's like you're a god.
Yeah. Just the cropping, not too much cropping on that.
Well, you say that, but actually at the time when everybody else is shooting 6, of course you can crop. I still sell pictures that I took with my 12 megapixel Canon, whatever it was, 5D, the original one, literally the Mark 1 5D. Still sell them.
We had, when we were shooting Gannets in Shetland, what were we shooting with? I think we were shooting with a Nikon D4S, and that was what? Was that 16? Maybe it was
6. Yeah, it wouldn't have been any more than that. It was about 16. Yeah,
it was probably 16 or so. Yeah, and the images hold up well. But your exposure has to be good, and you can't have a huge crop with those. At least when it comes to prints and stuff like that, you could probably get away with it, I guess, on Instagram and social media.
Well, yeah, or you're pixel peeping.
Yeah. Get that magnifying glass out.
Yeah, sit there. You need your test charts, and you need to photograph with a. Anyway, we almost thought to do this podcast first. I sent you a message, didn't I, and said we were talking about subjects for the next podcast, and I'd listened to a couple of podcasts over recent months, and something was nagging away in the back of my mind about a YouTube video I'd seen a while back, which was sort of talking about photography competitions, which I know we've talked about before, but it was all from a sort of entrance perspective, and I get that, because the majority of people that are listening to this are going to be entrants to photography competition. They're not going to be running them. But there were a few points that were raised, and I thought, actually, wouldn't it be nice to have almost like a right of reply to some of those things, and a few of which were them niggling at various aspects of photography competitions, and there were a couple of sort of misunderstandings, I think, going on, and I thought it would be nice to just chat about photography competitions from an organizer's perspective, just to try and address the balance to that a little bit. So it's not going to be a rant. It's just going to be well, these points were raised. I'd like to, let's deal with those from an organizer's and a judge's perspective, because obviously I organize these things and you've helped with the judging. So I thought that's what we'd have a chat about. So let's get into it. I think the first thing that, and I guess the main point that everybody made, the comment was that the organizers are just interested in making money out of competitions and nothing else. And that, well, certainly from my perspective, that really isn't true. And actually, you don't make any money unless you're Wildlife Photographer of the Year or a pretty major and well-established competition who has, sponsors that will actually pay cash on top of everything else that you get to make it all work. So the reality is that actually there isn't a lot of money to be made in photography competitions, and if that is your goal, then you're better off working at the local supermarket for minimum wage, because you'll get more out of it. Because certainly that's my experience from having started, obviously, Bird Photographer of the Year and been involved with that for 5 years, and more latterly with wild art. So it might be interesting just to break down a few figures for people, just so that they can really understand the mechanics of this. And Josh, when you're looking at competitions and you're looking at a competition which is in those sort of middle leagues, so you've got the top tier, which is Wildlife Photographer of the Year, Bird Photographer of the Year, those competitions that have been established for a reasonable amount of time, and have a large and very loyal entrant base that you can pretty much rely on every year. And we're talking, in terms of Wildlife Photographer of the Year, 40 to 50,000 images a year. With Bird Photographer of the Year, it's certainly over 20 now. It was somewhere in the region of 12 to 15 in the latter years that I was involved with it. But I know now that they're over 20. But the competitions that sit below those types of contests are, I'm thinking, well, wild art for one, obviously, of course, but I don't know, things like maybe British Wildlife Photography Awards, which is one that obviously people in the UK will know about. Something like Close-Up Photographer of the Year, which is starting to do really, really well. And you think, well, those competitions are at that sort of 8 to 12,000 entrants per year. So, that's, I certainly with wild art, our best year was the first year where we had over 10,000, but it didn't do so well in the last, in the preceding couple of years, in the subsequent couple of years. So when you look at those sort of numbers, and then you think, so let's say it's 10,000, you're getting 10,000 images, and the average price per image based on the entrance packages. So if you're looking at £20 for 5 images, for example, that would be £4 or $4 an image. That's, and the more images and the bigger the package you buy, it comes down. So I know for a fact that the average price is somewhere in the order of £2 to £3 or $2 to $3 per photograph. So you don't need to be a mathematician to work out 10,000 images against £2 to £3 dollars an image to get yourself to a figure. And you go, oh, that sounds like a lot of money. But you're not factoring in all the costs that are involved in running the competition. So when you look at, and I know Bird Photographer of the Year does this now, they don't have sponsored prizes, I don't think. They just have, they just give cash prizes. And I know that with Wild Art, certainly the cash prizes were generated from the income from the entrance fees. That's how I paid for them. So you take out generally what average prize now is what, £3,000 to £5,000, $3,000 to $5,000, something like that, for the main prize for the majority of competitions.
That sounds right.
Yeah. Then we had, well, I certainly did in terms of 8 category prizes. I think I paid somewhere, I think it was $250 for a category prize winner last year. So you times that by 8. Well, you got another couple of thousand there. Then you're looking at website hosting, which isn't cheap. You're looking at, you've then got to sort out the entry system, which runs into thousands. It's not hundreds, it's thousands. So those nice sort of entry portals that everybody enjoys, those have got to be paid for. And then they're not like a one-off fee, they're like an annual ongoing thing. Then you have things like, people don't take into consideration the payment providers' fees, because PayPal and these other credit card providers, they take a cut of your income. Then you've got all the time that then you've got things like the subscription to a mailing list service like MailChimp, for example, that looks after all the people that sign up for the newsletter, and you've got to control that data somehow, and they're not cheap. And all these sort of little subscriptions add up and add up and add up. By the time you take all of those things away, you're basically breaking even. So you're putting your time in for nothing. So this whole thing about, these competitions are making money. If they're making money, I can tell you this for nothing, they're not making money from the entrance fees. It's something else on the back of what that photo competition is doing, and you need that element, otherwise the whole business model doesn't work. And let's not forget that at the end of the day, photo competitions are businesses like anything else. You wouldn't expect to go to work and be paid nothing. They need to make a profit. They need to pay the people that are putting the work in, and there's no shame in that.
No, I'm totally with you. I mean, I kind of look at it, Rob, and being a judge in Wild Art and some other photo contests, I have some experience on the other side of it, obviously, but I look at it, it comes down to 2 general situations for me. One, it's either a photo contest for the sole purposes of having that contest, like Wild Art. So it's a labor of love, right? If these things were making a lot of money, there'd be contests everywhere. And obviously there are not a lot of contests. So you've got that. And then you also have other situations where you have foundations, magazines, or things that are wildlife nature related. That's their main goal. And they'll run an annual contest. Maybe it's smug to say this, but maybe it's more for an image grab, right? They get copyrights to these images that come in, and they use them for calendars, their magazines, and everything else. So the photo contests seem to fall in one of those 2 categories generally. But like even here in the United States, we don't have a lot. We had, Audubon does one. So they're able to use those images for their own social media calendars.
Yeah, but I mean, that's run for a completely different thing, isn't it? It's not run for profit. It's run for, as you say, image. I guess not an image grab. That's completely the wrong way of putting it. But it's run I think it's run for the for publicity that it gives them, and it's run for the ability to be able to use really good images to promote what they do, which is fine.
That's right. That's right. And then you have, Nature's Best. They were around for a while, and they were supported by I think the founder and former CEO of FedEx So he, I would imagine, gave money, and whatnot. So there was some subsidy there. Um, but they've kind of dropped off. I'm not even sure if they're technically active, but yeah. So there hasn't been a lot in North America, and so again, if these things were really huge money makers, they'd be all over the place, and they're just not. So the people who are involved, like us, like when you started Wild Art, I mean, it's a labor of love. You're doing it because not for the money, but because you enjoy it, right? And you want to promote artistic images, and um, it's frankly a great process to see some of the best photographers in the world display their artwork and get that recognition. So
Yeah. And
it's
that's
about the
certainly,
recognition, right? It's not about the money. I
yeah.
think if I'm a photographer, I'm submitting to contests for recognition, not that, oh, I need that, because it's, in a way, it's a lottery ticket, right? If you win the prize, great, and that's bonus, but it's more about the recognition, I think.
Yeah. I think that's the right way of looking at it as well. I mean, if you're looking at photo contests purely from the point of view of, well, that prize is 3, 5, 10 grand or whatever it might happen to be, I've got a chance of winning that. I think you're looking at it the wrong way anyway.
Put your money in the stock market.
Well, yeah, yeah, or buy a lottery ticket because you've probably got just about as much chance. Yeah, yeah. I agree, but yeah, it's certainly from from a business model point of view, I can think of far more lucrative things if money generation is your main aim. I certainly go and do something else because it's a lot of hard work and for not a lot of return. I mean, if you're you look at the overall income from the entrance fees alone, and it's not even a salary. It really is if you had no expenses. So
Mm-hmm.
if you get to the point where you've built something and you've built a regular audience, and don't forget, if somebody's going to give you money, which is very, very rare for a sponsor, they'll give you equipment for prizes, which a lot of people also moan about because so it does sound like a rant, doesn't it? I don't mean it to sound like this. But a lot of people are, not as appreciative sometimes of the prizes as because they are, it's a rucksack or it's it's a harness or it's a camera or it's this, that, and the other. It's not particularly what they want. They'd rather have the cash. And I do understand that. But sponsors will not give you money unless you have the gravitas and the reach of something like Wildlife Photographer of the Year, because it's got to be worth investing their money in. It's like advertising. If you're advertising on the television, for example, if a program is getting 10,000 viewers, you're not going to pay very much, if anything. Whereas if it's getting 10 million views, you're prepared to pay. And it's exactly the same principle. So if you're Wildlife Photographer of the Year, which has so much behind it, you've got the Natural History Museum in London, you've got an exhibition which tours the world, you've got a book that sells tens of thousands of copies every year. You've got everybody looking at that competition, which has been established for over 50 years. You are going to get an oil company or someone like that who wants an element of greenwash, if you like, will pay decent money for that because $100,000 to them is peanuts. It's a salary for a low end executive. Just you're getting the point that I'm making here, that if you've got to that level, then you're able to command that sort, and the snowball runs. But if you are a competition which is generating 10,000 entrants, a little bit of publicity here and there, why is anybody going to pay you money to have their brand associated with that? They'll give you kit, but they won't pay you money. And that's the reality of it. So don't think for a minute until you get to a certain point that somebody's going to come in and pay you 20, 30,000 pounds to run the competition and give you a salary, if you like, to have their name associated with it. And probably the people that would, you might not want to have associated with it anyway, because there might be some ethical issues with that. So.
Yeah, outside of the monetary value and the issues with contests. To me, I think the best positive, regardless of whether or not it's coming above water, or even if it's underwater, frankly, it's the sense of community that's built, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the major positive that comes for folks who organize contests, judge contests, participate in contests. It just brings, the nature photo community. It's growing and growing, and it continues to grow. But still, to me, it's still a community, right? It's a specific niche of photographers across the globe, and there's not many ways other than maybe social media, um, photo contests where people can come together, exchange ideas, congratulate one another, show recognition. So I think it's having a contest that's there and is in place for a number of years and has a brand. People want to get recognized. I think it builds a nice sense of community. To me, that is
Yeah.
the biggest positive. And you're not going to make a lot of money off of that. But that being said, that's the intangible that really sticks out to me. Just from being a part of Wild Art with you, Rob, and judging other contests, I've always found that to be the most rewarding thing.
Do you know what? And from an organizer's point of view, that's exactly what I enjoy the most. Is seeing people being recognized for taking some really amazing pictures and giving them that recognition, and actually looking at some of the ideas and some of the things they've come up with and going, wow, being inspired myself
Mm-hmm.
and using that to help inspire the next generation of photographer. And that's the most rewarding thing. And you honestly, you can't buy that. You really can't buy that. And that's and we're this is not the place to talk about it now, but obviously with Wild Art, I'm thinking of a whole restructure, a whole rebrand with it, simply because of this very, very thing. It's all about it's building a community of like-minded people. And I think it goes beyond a photography competition, because I don't want it. I don't want Wild Art to be like every other competition where it's a yearly involvement and then you're out. And but it is this feeling of community is something that I want to nurture and encourage, and I think it must go beyond just the competition itself. So that's partly why I've taken a break this year, is to think about how that might look, and what might work for people going forward. So yeah, this is not the place to talk about that, but I'll get on, and I'll make an announcement and talk about it once I've got it straight in my head. But these elements are starting to come together. But anyway, yeah, something else I wanted to there was another point that was made, and I do get it. I get it entirely. And one of the other major issues that people had was the feeling that it was a bit like an old boys club. I think that was the very phrase that was used in one of the podcasts that I listened to, in terms of the people that win. And it's always the same people. There must be some manipulation going on here. Blah, blah, blah. They say the judging's anonymous, but we don't really know what the judging process is. It's not very transparent. So there were a few questions raised around that topic, and I completely understand that, because with Wild Art, there are names that come up again and again and again, and I can understand how people may feel that way, and I've certainly noticed it in other competitions. I think what I can really say to that is that I have, well, one of the most important things to me with this has always been the integrity of the judging process. And you'll attest to this, Josh, because obviously you're part of that process. That none of the judges ever, not even I, want to know who's taken images until we've completed that judging process. So they're hidden from me via the entry portal. So I don't have a clue who they are, and neither do the judges until we've chosen the images. Now, you can't get away from the reality that certain people have very recognizable styles, and there are some images where you might as well write the person's name across the front of them, because you just know who's taken them, because you've seen their work before and it's just got their thumbprint all over it. There's nothing you can do about that. There is nothing you can do about a judge recognizing an image that they know, someone they know has taken. But I can tell you this for nothing. Every time that has happened, that judge has stepped away and said, I really can't comment on this image because I know who's taken it, and it's, I must let other people discuss it and make a decision, because I've got to declare, an interest in it, if you like. It's not an interest, but there can't be, they can't be completely sort of subjective about it. They know who's taken it, so they've got a conflict of interest and they step away, and that's happened every single time. And that, the judging panel was chosen very carefully for people with integrity, and expertise. And I can say every single image we've looked at, we have always chosen on the merits of the image and not who's taken it, which has resulted at times in people winning more than one prize in one category, or multiple prizes over the course of a year. It just so happens they've taken the best images, and that is what it's all about.
Yeah, I agree. It should always be about the merit, right? And look, I will say from my perspective, just my opinion, and I've had similar thoughts on other contests, though, because you'll always, I mean, we're human, right? We'll look at the winners, and some will be incredible on some of these other contests, and I'll be like, why did that win, right? And people will be like, well, that's crap. Who picked that one, right? There must be. So it's just natural. I think it's it's just human instinct to think some of these things, because they're, quite frankly, so subjective. You're talking about wildlife photographer of the year. There is some I don't know if controversy is probably too strong of a word, but a couple of years ago, there is some strong criticism or concern that the winners of Wildlife Photographer of the Year were predominantly male, and there wasn't enough female representation in Wildlife Photographer of the Year in terms of awards. I don't know how it breaks down in terms of submissions and so forth. They probably have that data, but that being said, I know there was some concern around that, and I have seen a certain push around certain contests around making sure that things are not only equitable in terms of basically, even in addition to merit, that there's equity in terms of the amount of folks that are participating across different demographic groups and stuff like that. So I think, and this kind of, I think, comes out of or stems from ongoing conversations elsewhere in society and government and politics, and there's an ongoing dialogue about that, and there has been for the past, I don't know, so many years or whatnot, but that seems to be something more recent that's entered the discussion in the wildlife photography space as it relates to the contest. I don't know if you've seen that, Rob, but I've seen it, at least as it relates to like wildlife photographer of the year and some of the bigger contests.
Yeah, and it's difficult, because when you look at, okay, so I've looked at the stats of people that listen to this podcast, for example, and I can tell you, and okay, so you'd think that if somebody's listening to this podcast, they're interested in wildlife photography. Kind of makes sense, right? And the stats are something you'll be shocked, actually, when the gender split is something like 85 to 15% male to female.
Wow.
So
I wouldn't have thought it was
tells
that.
you something.
Yeah.
That tells you something. So if that, and I'm not saying it is, but if that is played out in terms of the people that enter photography competitions, now I know we're talking about slightly different things here, because the podcast is generally about wildlife photography, and we're talking specifically about contests here, and so that there may be I'm sure there is a difference. I know from an entrant point of view, I don't think that statistic plays out in the same way, because there are way more women that enter wild art, I think, than that statistic would suggest. But it does it does give you a good insight into perhaps where the interest might lie in terms of a gender split,
Mm,
and the fact may well be that there are far more men that that are taking wildlife images than women. I don't know the overall stats because I have no way of knowing. What I'm going
yeah.
is what I've seen from entries into the competition, and then podcast listeners. It's just an interesting thing to look at, and you go, well,
Mm,
why is that? Why would that be? It may well be that men listen to a lot more podcasts than women. I don't know. I
yeah.
maybe that's mirrored throughout, through a lot of different genres that you might choose to pick. I have no idea, but it's interesting just to look at it.
Yeah. I mean, anecdotally, being in the field, whether birding or photographing over the past number of years, I've been seeing more and more diversity out there, which I think is great. I mean, because at the end of the day, you want everybody. I mean, nature's incredible, right? Photography is incredible. You want everybody to participate and enjoy this experience. So, middle-aged, older white guys, I mean, that's fine. I mean, but at the end of the day, you want to make sure you get everybody involved and love it because, it's something that I think, it's so special. So, but I have been seeing, and again, it's anecdotal. I don't have the statistics, obviously, but over the past couple of years, I'm seeing, younger folks out there. Um, you know, uh, I've seen a lot of women out there photographing. I know a lot of female wildlife photographers, and I think those numbers are increasing, and I think that's a good thing. But I would imagine if you go way back, or even in recent history, I'm sure it's a male dominated, primarily middle aged to older males, right? I mean, that's probably just how it was, but I think it's changing, and I think that's a good thing.
Oh, it's definitely changing. I can tell you, 20 years ago, yeah, middle-aged white male.
Yeah,
That's it's a fact.
recently retired,
Yep,
or
the people with, but well, let's face it, the people with the money and the time.
yeah, yeah,
And that's a big factor. But it's changed because I think the equipment is a lot more accessible now. If you go back to the 90s, then wildlife photography wasn't very accessible for people. There was not a lot written about it. Um, and you had to be a certain type, and most of the recognized wildlife photographers at that time were 30 plus white males.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a fact.
And they were probably working for, National Geographic or doing stuff for certain magazines on expeditions. And yeah, it wasn't a hobby per se or a pastime for people at that point in time. It was hardcore people doing, putting images out there in major publications. And then it seems to have
Yeah, well,
become,
it was people pushing the boundaries
yeah.
and exploring all those places that people now take for granted about being able to get to easily. Places like Svalbard and Antarctic, and all those sorts of areas. Those were the pioneers of those locations, and now we just kind of take it for granted. We can just book a trip and go and take the images that were, basically those guys were taking, and they were guys
Hmm.
pretty much, to I was going to say to a man. That's the wrong way of putting it, isn't it? But they were.
Yeah. Yeah.
And but it has absolutely, it has changed, and I can tell you that there are, and I can think of this with wild art in particular, some of the very, very best and most imaginative and creative images are taken by women.
Yeah.
Definitely, definitely, and that, I have learned so much. I mean, so much from that. I mean, obviously Georgina being a judge, and look at what she's doing, and how she's been pushing the boundaries and you know doing well. I mean, Gail, Victoria,
Hmm.
Rebecca and all these
Yeah.
people, and then you look at some of the winning image. I can think of Simone
Simone
Beaumont.
Baumeister.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus,
He's
who would have
amazing.
thought? Who would have thought of taking an image by disconnecting your lens from the camera body and then angling it in so you get this weird light effect. I mean, WTF?
I agree. Yeah. I mean, her stuff is really, really cool. Out of the box. Um, just
Yeah,
amazing. You know.
yeah, it is. So I can't speak for other photo contests and what goes on in their judging process other than those that I've been involved with. And, it was certainly very, very important for me. And I have no, I think for the vast majority, and I can think of two or three other that I know operate in the same way. And those are the ones that I would actually enter myself, is that the judging process, is very strict and it is entirely anonymous and undertaken with the utmost integrity. And the old boys network does not exist for those competitions.
Mm.
And the best images get awarded. Now, photography is subjective, and what wins one day might not win another day. You've been in those judging situations enough times, Josh, to know that it depends what side of bed you get out of in the morning as to what actually ultimately is going to win.
Yeah.
There's always a handful of images that float to the top and you're going to talk about. But what actually wins and what comes runner up and what's third or whatever can change day to day, or it could do depending
Judges
on the mood and
all
the
have
people.
their own perspectives and styles. Yeah, you're right. I mean, normally it's easy to get down to the top images, but once you put a certain amount of judges on there, each with a distinct style, how they come to consensus, there's so much variability there. And that's where it becomes subjective, right? And that's where
Yeah.
the details matter on certain things. And yeah, I mean, there's so many variables there. It depends, like you said. And it's a lotto ticket to a certain point. I think getting semi-finaled or getting an image that's recognized or in the final piece, that's merit, that's your technical skills and whatnot. If you're a good photographer, that's probably going to happen a lot. But after that, that's where it becomes more of there's a little bit more of luck involved, and because there's just more variability and more
Yeah, and
subjective.
sometimes you'll take an image with absolute X factor that just can't be ignored.
Yeah.
And then yeah, I can think of the Hoopers example. Just
Yeah.
I've never been in a situation, I think, where it was just so obvious what the winner was going to be. It was going to be, well, that's the winner. What do we talk about next?
And that's
And
rare, right? I mean, that
that's
doesn't
very
happen
rare.
too often. Yeah, it's
Mm.
normally okay. Well, we all agree on the top 10. These are probably the top 10, and then you start, and that's where the back and forth happens, right? And you're comparing things, and things can change a little bit, and as the dialogue goes on, it's a fun process. I have to admit,
Yeah. So don't, it's one of those things, you could win one day and then be runner up another or be a highly commended another. Just depends. But if you're in that zone, you're doing something right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're doing something right. But anyway, so that's as far as the judging process is concerned, that's from my perspective and the photo competitions that I run and the competitions that I enter, which aren't many, I have to say. I'm fairly limited. I know that the judging process is, yeah, it it's it's completely anonymous, and it's done in absolutely the right way, and I have no issues with things that have been leveled at competitions in the past. And do you know what? I think there's less and less of that goes on. I'm not saying it hasn't gone on, because I think there's some basis to the call it accusation if you like, but I think there is some basis to the comment. Um, but no, I mean the other thing that gets raised quite a lot as well, if we're talking about judging, is that judges are picking an element of mediocre work to mix in with the really good stuff.
Mm.
Because they don't want the competition, or they don't want people to feel that the competition is beyond their skill level. So they want to show the really good stuff that gets awarded, then behind that they want to show some more ordinary, if in open quotation marks, work, so they attract in the level of entries that they need to sustain the financial model of the competition. And I think there's certainly an element of that that could be true. Not with Wild Art, I can tell you that, but I think, I'm not going to point to any particular competition in this. I don't know. I'm not involved in anything else, but I think that certainly has been a consideration for some in the past, because it stands to reason. If
If it's a
you're,
business, right? You want to
yeah,
bring in more images, and if everybody thinks they're not good enough for the contest, they're not going to submit, right? Yeah, so I understand the logic behind that. The other
exactly.
thing too, Rob, to that point, again, this is just my opinion, and not with Wild Art, because we've both been there and we know this, but I've always had the suspicion on some other contests, not all, but some here and there, they'll consistently put in big names, and having well-known big names, whether they're folks who shot for National Geographic, just like we know there's a few big names out there, or recognizable names. By having them recognized in the contest, that maybe the thought is that gives that contest more gravitas, right? To have a certain name in there, or a certain brand. So again, just it's a perception of mine. I could be wrong, but I've always thought that is a factor sometimes as well.
If you want to grow a competition from scratch, what better way than awarding somebody with 50,000 Instagram followers,
Yeah,
who's going to share their success with their Instagram following, and all of a sudden you've got access to 50,000 new potential entrants. Of course, of course, that's you could get seduced by that, and it's definitely a consideration. Of that there is no doubt. So there there is no doubt that there's a that is a valid point. All I can say is from an organizer's point of view, and I speak for myself and nobody else, because I can't speak for anybody else, is that doesn't come into the reckoning during the judging process. To just look, my priority is awarding the best images. And when you look at Wild Art, it's slightly different from a lot of the other competitions in terms of, its focus is on the artistic, not the literal, which a lot of the other competitions take into consideration. I want the competition needs to stand out, needs to be slightly different. And of course that's our edge, if you like, is the fact that we're going for that particular, I call it a market, because you have to look at it in that way, because of course it has to generate enough money to keep it running. But that's where our niche is, if you like. It's looking at the artistic, it's looking at the artistic side of things. And I just look to award things that are new and innovative and fit what the competition is all about. It's not about, I could name you half a dozen names off the tip of my tongue that have got really good Instagram followings that, wouldn't it be great if such and such and such and such and such and such all were awarded, and all of a sudden you've got access to 250,000 Instagram followers and they're all sharing it around. It's free marketing.
I'm just trying to think. I mean, most of the awardees on Wild Art, I don't think they, a lot of them didn't even have, some of them I don't even think had Instagram accounts, right? So, I mean, it's kind of if there's any crossover, like maybe a Spherico, Q-Potty, that's where you'll see, I think, some of the crossover in terms of the photographers. But it's just more about the art for them, and coming up with an image than selling itself, the marketing.
And a lot of people, actually, I can think of 2 or 3 people that do really, really well in competitions. And as you say, they have little or no social media presence at all. All they do is concentrate on what they do best. and it's not only wild art they do well in, they do well in other competitions as well.
Yeah.
And I can think of 2 or 3 examples, of people that actually, I think some of whom have just recently, succumbed to the social media draw. They've actually put themselves on, but they do it for the love of photography, and I think that's the message, isn't it? This is what we do it for. We do it because we love photography and we love wildlife, and the financial aspects. There is a reality here that the thing needs to pay for itself and it needs to be able to run. So there's, it can't be for free, because that model doesn't work. And if it did work, there'd be elements to that people wouldn't like. There'd be image grabs and all that, rights grabs and all that sort of stuff, which people really don't like. And that's something else I could talk about, but let's not go down that rabbit hole. But something else which is quite, I think, from an organizer's point of view, one of the things that I'm most conscious of, and I'm concerned about it, is being caught out with some fakery or trickery and having that sort of embarrassment, if you like, the wolf jumping the gate or the anteater, that type of scenario occurring. That gives me nightmares, I have to admit.
And I think that's only going to get worse in the future, Rob, with AI.
Tell me about it.
I mean, is there a way to fake a raw image, right? Because every contest, including wild art, you have to send in your raw image, right? And that is the way to make sure that there's a standard and you realize, okay, well, here's the original shot, and this wasn't extensively manipulated or things weren't changed. But if there's going to, I'm sure there probably is now, who knows, a way to manipulate a raw image, and that's your way around that stuff.
But some people don't take images in RAW. What if somebody tells you that, oh, I didn't shoot RAW, I shot a JPEG, and here's the original JPEG. I can fake a JPEG with the right metadata in it.
Yeah.
For you.
I mean, not many people shoot with the JPEG, though. I would be immediately suspicious, right? Because for all the wildlife photographers that I know, if somebody puts an image together that's incredible and they're submitting it to a contest and they're like, oh, I just shoot JPEG, I'd be like, you're full of caca. I don't know, I just wouldn't believe it. But
there are people that do. And if you're shooting in pre-capture with a Nikon Z9, you can't shoot in RAW. You have to shoot in JPEG. So
it's only JPEG.
So there are those situations that can occur. So, and the thing is, you have to take, if you are mistrusting of people in general, that doesn't, that's not a good place to be.
Yeah. You have to give the photographer the benefit of the doubt.
Exactly. Because that's, what sort of person would you be if you didn't? And I judge people by my own standards. So I'm honest and open, and as people, I hope, can tell, certainly from what I've discussed in in this podcast and others, and people have dealings with me, and I always look at people in the same way. I mean, I always judge people the same way. I mean, what sort of world would we live in if I didn't? And if I was always suspicious of people? Yes, you have to have that element in you, but I have to have suspicions raised in some way before I want to go down that sort of rabbit hole, if you like. And there are times when it's happened, and we've talked about it on the podcast before. I've had images of pinned insects that are trying to be passed off as in being in flight and doing some amazing thing, and the judges have all looked at it, and we've looked at it and gone, that's a great image. And then something in the back of my mind is nagging, this isn't right about this. I don't know what it is. I don't know. And all of a sudden it hits me. The bloody insect's upside down. Why would it be that way? And then you look into it, and then you look into other aspects of it, and you go, no, I know exactly what's happened here. Exactly what's happened here. And I'm not having any of that. So, but those banana skins are out there for you. And at some point, you're going to slip up on one. That's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's probably how whenever there has been like intentional manipulation historically, it's manipulation within the frame. So it's not digital. The frame itself, the entire shot was manipulated.
Yeah.
I think moving forward to your point, there's also now that risk of digital manipulation, right? Where, you're like you said, if it's a JPEG or something comes in, it's manipulated digitally. That's
Well,
another.
AI also gives me sleepless nights.
Yeah, definitely.
Because you get to a point where you don't want to be naturally suspicious, but there will come a time in the not too distant future, because don't forget, a bit like digital technology 25 years ago when it started to come in, we're just at the start of this. So where's it going to go? Where is it going to end up? Are you going to be able to believe anything you see?
Yeah.
And honestly, people will do anything to win.
Yeah, I have to
No,
say that's one thing
some
about
people
nature
will.
photographers. Being competitive is a healthy thing. I think it's part of our nature as humans. But um, there's something about wildlife photography and the people involved in wildlife photography. They are very, generally speaking, I think, are very competitive
And the
people, and that's
and the vast
yeah,
majority are completely honest
yeah,
and have absolute 100% integrity. I'm absolutely not questioning that one iota, but it only takes one or two people and you
mhm.
get them. I have had people trying to pass themselves off as under 18, trying to win young prizes in wildlife
Wow,
photography competitions, blatantly doing it. And you have to, anyway, you have to wonder,
yeah,
don't you? And this is what you need to be mindful of, because at the end of the day, as an organizer, if something like that happens and it all comes out, everybody then looks at you. What are your processes? Did you do this correctly? Did you do that correctly? So the buck stops quite rightly with the organizer. And yeah, so those sorts of things give me sleepless nights as well. So
yeah, and also too, I think the buck should stop with the photographer, because that all you have as a photographer, as well as your reputation. You get caught doing something, I mean, is it worth it? Because your reputation's ruined, right? I don't know how you resuscitate that, but to try to do everything you can to win, and being called out, or people see that, okay, well, you did something intentionally wrong or it was fraudulent. I mean, who
but
wants that?
if you want to be remembered, it's a damn
Yeah.
good way of doing it.
Yeah, in the
Well,
wrong way, but
well,
yeah,
I mean, we're talking about wildlife photographer of the year. The two images we're talking about, I remember. There's a lot of other images I don't,
yeah,
but I remember those images because they were
they were
dodgy.
winners, right? I mean, they were
Yeah,
selected too, I think, right? Yeah. I mean, one was a grand prize winner, right? If I'm not mistaken, the anteater, I think,
both.
might have
I think both,
been.
but certainly the wolf
Yeah.
jumping the
Oh, the
gate.
wolf was too, where it was
Yeah,
jumping the.
yeah.
Okay. Wow.
So you,
Mm,
you've got all those things to contend with as well. And as I said, spotlight comes down on you in the end,
yeah.
because it's the processes you've put in place that have allowed this to happen. And I get it. It's quite right. It's absolutely right. But anyway, there
We should
are.
do a whole podcast on why there's such drive and competition in the photography community. I think it's healthy, right? Like you said, it's a good thing, but I do find like people in the wildlife photography community are fair, even birders too, right? I mean, I don't know, but just my
Yeah,
own
it's
observation. I think
interesting, isn't it? And I
yeah,
think the other thing that is going to become much hotter than it is at the moment, and it's a pretty major consideration now, and it's ethics. And we've talked about this with Georgina before,
yeah, yeah,
and I think rightly so. There, when you go back 20 years, there were a lot of practices that were going on then that are very frowned upon now. And I think there's a lot more that's going to come out,
yeah.
and things are going to get a lot, and quite rightly so. I mean, you
There's a
know,
bigger footprint, more people out there, right? I mean, if you only had 30 people in the field 34, 40 years ago, well, I'm exaggerating, a couple hundred people that were serious about this around the globe, okay, if they did some dodgy stuff, it didn't really have an impact. But now you have thousands and thousands and thousands everywhere out there, and
Well,
maybe it's going to, yeah,
the key
yeah, they're
word
out
there
there,
is impact, isn't it?
yeah.
The key
And
word
I
there is
often wonder, even if you went to a wildlife photographer and they who claimed, I'm one of the most ethical and I love my subjects or whatever, and if you had the proposition and you said, there's this particular shot, this animal that you've always wanted to photograph, would you photograph it, or what if you were told that by you not photographing it, it's going to help preserve it? Don't even be there. Don't even show up. Don't even. What are they going to choose, right? Most of them would choose, well, I'll take that chance. I want to really see this animal and photograph it, right? I mean, people are just that way,
yeah.
they want that shot. So it's a tough thing.
Human beings are natural listers. We all want,
Mm,
and
yeah,
I count myself in this as well.
yeah,
You want to see, well, how many bird magazines, for example, will say, I mean, I don't know how many birds is a good number to see in the US in terms of different species. I don't know if there's a number which is which people aspire to seeing throughout the year, but I know in the UK it's 200. If you see 200 different bird species in the UK in a year, that's what most people see. Most birders want to see.
mm,
So if you're aspiring to, you're listing your. This is a natural thing for us to do. It's like we want to put everything in a box. We want to tick that off. Yes, I've seen that. I've seen that. I've seen that. It's like, oh, how many people turn around and say they've seen a bird? Oh, that's a lifer for me. I've never seen that bird before. Tick. And they
yeah.
even say that's a tick for me. It's a tick.
It's
It's a
like
tick in the
collecting
box.
stamps or collecting coins. It's
Yeah.
that same kind of mentality. Yeah. In the
And
US, it's like
photography is the new way of recording your sightings. It's no longer written in a log
yeah.
book. You are taking a picture of it, however shit that picture may be or good that picture may be. You're taking it because you're listing it, and you want the image rather than just the entry in the book. Because does anybody really believe you? Oh yeah, well, I got a picture of it. Oh yeah, but do you know it was that bird, or was it this? Could have been that. You might have been mistaken.
And this is a controversial opinion, but just my view. But the photographers who are more about chasing and just ticking off and photographing all these different animal or bird species or whatever, I tend to find that they're not, in my opinion, the top tier, the better photographers. The better photographers are the ones I think that are out there creating art, and they don't need a rare bird to do that. They can do that with a pigeon or a heron, or so I find the folks who are often out just trying to photograph every bird species or different animal species, and it's about that checklist. It's less about the photograph, and it's more about the
I
I've got it in my
100% agree. The
yeah.
two images that I've ever had success with in photography competitions, one was a mute swan, well, two mute swans as it happened, and the other was a dragonfly that you could see, but I see every year fairly commonly. It was a group of dragonflies, not difficult to see, common subjects, but just photographed in a different way, or a just taking advantage of some amazing conditions.
Mm-hmm.
That's just, I think they're far more interesting than a standard picture of something rare. But what's rare for someone is a commonplace subject for somebody else, because it just
Yeah.
depends on your perspective and where you are in the world. I mean, there are some species that are rare, generically, but yeah, I mean, what's what's rare for you in terms of birds? I mean, a blue heron, for example, or a green heron or whatever. If you have one turn up in the UK,
I think I'm looking
you
at one right
yeah,
now at the
exactly.
window.
You'd be fighting the crowds to get to it. So it's
Yeah.
rare for the UK, but it's everyday occurrence for you.
Yeah. Yep. It's all perspective, and
Of course it is. So there, one person's rare as another person's common. It just depends on where you are.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I 100% agree. I just think it's more the artistic merit in the image is far more. And actually, do you know when things are in their natural environment and they're doing natural stuff and they're not being disturbed, I just think those images are just so more compelling because,
I agree.
and
I'm at the point where, like, as far as the way I shoot now, to me, the most compelling change that I look forward to when I travel for images, it's less the subject and more the environment, right? I mean, if I'm shooting in a desert, I can't do that here, right? So it's more the environmental surroundings than it is, shooting a different type of sparrow or whatever.
I've noticed that with your stuff. Yeah, it's a lot wider. And I
Yeah.
just think it's so much more interesting. I mean, if you've taken a picture of a Blackburnian warbler, for example, and it's tight image, well, yeah, and I've
Yeah.
seen, however many images of tight images of a Blackburnian. How is it going to be any different from the last dozen I've seen?
Yeah.
Okay, you might have amazing light and it might be a really good, but it's not going to stand out because there's not that extra something to it. Whereas if you're shooting it wide and there's a lot more interest, and actually we've talked about this before, but it's a lot more difficult to get the composition pleasing when you're shooting with a lot more space than it is if you're doing tight, because you've only got one thing to concentrate on.
Yeah.
Whereas you're putting all these elements together and they've got to work is a lot more difficult.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, at the end of the day, fine feather detail only goes so far in an image.
Yeah, get your macro lens out.
The barbules there. Am I saying that right? The barbules on the feather. You can see the barbules.
Yeah, exactly. But hey, there are lots of other things I could rant on about. I don't want to rant, and that wasn't the whole point. And anyway, we've kind of gone down different side alleys that we normally do with these conversations. But yeah,
I'm glad we're touching on this stuff because people don't talk about this stuff. I'm glad we are. It's a lot of stuff we're talking about. Most people avoid. So, and it shouldn't be taboo.
I know nothing's taboo with me. And as I said, there were just a few things that I've picked up on, with podcasts that I've listened to, and I understand why people think that way, and there's some validity in a lot of what they say. But it's interesting, how many people actually run photo competitions? Not many. And I tell you, there probably nobody else would come on and talk as candidly about them as you and I can. If you're a person that does enter photography competitions, it just might be interesting for you to have another perspective, and that from organizers and judges. So there is one thing that I did want to say before we wrap up, talking about judges in particular, is that these guys give up and girls, of course, give up their time for nothing, for no pay. They do it because they love it, and they do it because they believe in the competition, and they believe in the process, and they do it with the utmost integrity. The people that I've worked with, so hats off to them for that, because as I said, it's for them it really is a labor of love. It really is. I just wanted to say that because I've been very, very grateful for all the effort and help that I've had, and it's I've always found it an incredible experience to sit in a room or sit online virtually, with these people, and I'm standing on the shoulders of giants in a lot of a lot of these situations, and it's quite humbling, and it's a real privilege to be able to do it. Anyway, thanks, Josh. Good to chat, and I hope people enjoyed what was a bit of a rant in places, but hey, it's all part of the process. So I hope you enjoyed that, and we'll talk about something a little bit more lighthearted next time.
Cool. Anyway, thanks all.
Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you all again next time.
See ya.
You have been listening to the Wildlife Photography Podcast. If you have enjoyed the content, then please help us to spread the word by sharing a link on your social media platforms, giving us a like, and leaving us a comment. See you all again next time.